Living Heritage is designed to highlight, examine, and celebrate elements of the rich cultural heritage of St. Kitts and Nevis. Journey with us as we explore our distinct and immersive culture. Welcome to a life of pride in our past and confidence in our present and future. Welcome to Living Heritage. Today's Living Heritage, or ICH mini-documentary series of St. Kitts and Nevis, has to do with the ICH domains of oral traditions, the performing arts, and it also touches on social practices, rituals, and festive events, since it discusses activities or movements that were critical in shaping our cultural identity. The elements are storytelling, dance, and the impact of the Caribbean integration movement. It was our honor to discuss with someone who makes a mark on the early dance scene of St. Kitts and was a trailblazer in stressing the importance of monetary compensation for local creatives and cultural practitioners. Our TKB today is Aurelia Jacqueline Armony. Listen as she explains her activism for the culture of St. Kitts and Nevis while making a developmental impact on the education system and spearheading a team that improved access to historical documentation in the Federation.
My name is Aurelia Jacqueline Armony. I was born on the 22nd of October 1947, and I am 77 years old at this point in time. My grandfather came here at the end of in 1894-95, around there. He was Spanish. And he came from Spain. Actually, he landed in, I don't know why he emigrated, but he landed in Antigua. He had an uncle in Antigua. But he visited St. Kitts, and he loved St. Kitts so much, he didn't leave. He just established a business here, and he had many skills. He was a master jeweler. You know, this is his ring for his wife. You know, he made jewelry. He was a photographer. His photographs, I can send you some. They were part and parcel of his job. But he also established, his name was A.M. Lusada. You might have heard that, A.M. Lusada. It was a business that began on the bayfront, and then eventually it grew, and then he established on Bank Street. That's where he lived. He bought a place, so he grew. And then when he died, my mother was living in Trinidad at the time. He needed a successor, and none of his other children were interested. And Mommy was the youngest, my mother, Aurelia Trestrill. She came back to St. Kitts to take over the business. And so we left Trinidad. I was about 7, 8, if that, and we came to live in St. Kitts. And Mommy was born here. My grandmother was my maternal grandmother was French. So I have a Spanish grandfather, and her origins are in St. Bart's and Guadeloupe. And her father was the French consul here, representing the French government in St. Kitts. And that's how he came here, and he had something like 15 children, all of them born in St. Kitts. I think they live in Old Road. And so she was from here, and my grandfather met her, and they got married, and then, they had 4 children. And then I am an issue of the youngest one, my mother. And she married a South African doctor who came here must have been around the 30s, 1930s. And he was a doctor, and he worked for the British government. He was Jewish. He was a doctor, and he worked for the British in all different territories. So he met my mother here. They had a child. They had 2 children, one born in St. Kitts, one born in Nevis. He was transferred to the South Pacific. I have a brother born in Fiji, and I was born in Trinidad, all because of his movements as a doctor working for the British government. In a a sense, I feel dancing has been part and parcel of my life throughout. I started very young. As little children, as a child in Trinidad, that's where I was born. And that's where I spent first few years of my life. And dancing began then. And I can't think of a time during my youth and adulthood, except, let's say, after the age of, by the time I hit 50 years, it became a different situation. But throughout my life, dance has been part and parcel of my life and my persona. I was educated in Barbados at Codrington High School. And for the 5 years I was there, beginning in first form, ending in fifth form, every year there was a class of ballet. It was ballet. And we took, just like you do in music here, you have the Royal Academy that you do the piano, grade 1 to 5. Well, you had a similar situation in ballet where you could do grade 1 to 5. So throughout the 5 years that I was there, I did grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in the last year I was there, I did, and that is a sort of, after grade 5, now you go on to professional ballet with the Royal Academy. But that was where I ended. In terms of that, the training in ballet. When I was at university, I did dance, but I began to realize that ballet was not, I was not interested in ballet anymore. It did not fulfill my understanding of dance. And it was very rigid, very classical, very European, you understand? And I came from a different culture. But it was absolutely essential for my training, the training of your body and, how to use it and what to do and so forth, and the stretches and that kind of thing. But in terms of my interest, really ballet was not of great interest to me after I left school. So I explored all sorts of different types of dance, modern ballet even, ethnic dances, and eventually I would take classes for all different types. But it was when I came back home now, that was in 1971, returned from university. I had a sort of variety of experiences in dance training. But I've been teaching ever since I was a teenager. I would have classes. So teaching dance, especially in St. Kitts where you really did not have many people doing the kind of dance I was doing. Who you had was a Miss Soto, a Chilean lady who had come here via, you remember, Mrs. Capson. Mrs. Capson was from Chile too. And I think she was a friend and she brought her here. Miss Soto, I don't know what her first name was. And so when I came, she had just left. I did not really know her. And she left behind a studio that I found out about when I decided to really do dancing, teach dancing in a much more concerted way. But before that, so when I came back, I would give dance classes at the UE Center, Extramural Center. And, I would give, focus tended to be more ballet-based, but also modern dance. So it was not strictly ballet and very experimental too. So when I came back in 71 and I started the classes at Extramural, I started teaching at Sandy Point High School as well. So, but I then was able to rent the studio that Miss Soto had left behind. And it had mirrors, it had bars, it had everything that a dance studio would have. It was wonderful. It was really an opportunity. And I rented that at MIS, Mutual Improvement Society. I worked with Mr. Berridge and rented it. So I rented it and began to have dance classes formally there. It was children. It was a children's dance classes that I conducted at the Extramural. But once I moved and I had a studio, I tended to teach more teenagers, not adults, but more young women. And they were all female. And so that was a center for dance. And that was where I operated. You don't have other people. I think of Joan Malalo. Apparently, no, I went away for a certain amount of time. So I know there were people who were doing dance. I left St. Kitts in 1977 to follow my husband, who went to university in Trinidad, right? And we were there for 10 years. And I know in between, during that period, I think Joan Malou was one of them. And you had, what's her name? June Frederick. And there was a certain, in the schools, and they took place in the schools. We dance when we're happy, we dance for everything. Have always been. It's a cultural expression that goes way back with the ancestors. So that's a denial of culture, as far as I'm concerned. It was a rural community, rural children. Poverty was rife, malnourishing. I mean, that is for the education part, but what I learned from those children, and it's something I hope your department will explore, is the folk songs that are ours. The folk songs that belong to St. Kitts, and well, I don't know about Nevis, but St. Kitts. And I used to have to teach French. I was a French teacher. But children who didn't have books, they didn't have shoes, they didn't have, you know what I mean? It really was, and I had to teach it from grade 5 to grade 1, and all the different streams. There again, education, all the different streams. You had children that were more able and so forth. You have to understand the education system. So Mr. Halliday, he insisted, and I think the ministry insisted, that every child had to learn a foreign language, and I was a French teacher. Now, what are I going to teach? So I used to teach songs. We used to dance to the songs, French songs. So they were learning French songs. I used to do the geography of St. Kitts, because you have so many French names on St. Kitts: Basse-Terre, Dodanpon, La Vallée, Molineux. You understand? That, therefore, through this means, I had to be very creative. And I taught French like that. I'll never forget, which would be a sacrilege almost, La Marseillaise, which is the national anthem of France. And me teaching these children and them taking up their rulers and them drumming, you understand? And if the French people could only see that, you understand? But for them, it was a spunky kind, they made it a spunky song. You understand? By the time they sang it, and they had to drum, with their rulers and pencils and things like that. So it was absolutely, I used to love it. And it allowed me to be very innovative and creative. An interesting anecdote to all this is that when I started teaching in Sandy Point, as usual, I was teaching dance, and I had to change the name of it, because parents would not allow their children, and the religion would not allow them to use the word dance. So I had to change it to movement. You understand? So as if it was a physical exercise. And that was okay. And for all the speech days we had, there was always movement accompanied by music and so forth. So you have to find ways to get around it, because it was a natural expression for those children. Teaching in Trinidad was hugely important for my personal development, because they did not teach French in the same way that French was being taught in St. Kitts. All the schools had to do either French or Spanish. My area I was a specialist in French. And so by chance, I got a job. That is a story in itself. But I got a job, and I was asked if I could, when I would be interviewed, they asked me if apart from French, is there anything, can you teach social studies? I said yes. Can you teach general paper? I said yes. can you teach English? I said, yes, I needed a job. But not only that, the kind of university degree I had included everything. I had done anthropology, geography, I had done film, I had done all sorts of other subjects. Okay, I focused on French as a specialist, but I wanted a general education. I wanted exposure to everything. So I felt quite capable, and I was capable. And when I got the job, I was teaching English, GP, social studies, 3 subjects I never taught, and then the French. And therefore, my breadth as a teacher expanded. And I know by the time I left Trinidad, I was focusing exclusively on social studies. And at that time, they had introduced social studies at the CXC level. And I was part of the development of the curriculum because we were sent to Guyana because we were doing a component on CARICOM and so forth. And I did certain experiments, and I started a teaching diploma. I dropped out, got sick. And I'm very experimental. And experimenting, so it fitted beautifully. I love the challenges. So when I returned to St. Kitts, I was able now, because they didn't do that subject here, I was able now to introduce it and pioneer it into Bastia High School to begin with. And that was interesting and, wonderful. I think it's a fantastic subject, a subject that everybody should do, but I suppose they do it at primary level now. So it's social studies has become part and parcel of the curriculum, but in those days it wasn't there. You had a subject called civics that was more governmental, how the government works, but social studies includes all that. So the Trinidad experience was absolutely enriching for me because it allowed me to really develop in ways that I could not have developed here because social studies was so, I became a specialist in social studies. What I always say social studies is that a student comes to the class already having information because they live in a culture, they live in a country, they live in a family. But what we do is we now put it in, we make sense of what they live. We now put it in little boxes so that they understand that family, what is the role of your family? What are they doing to you? What is the role of your school? What is the role of the government? So it evolves. And then what is your country? What is a region? I mean, that was my specialty in that at the university when I was studying here. I put together how do you teach? How do you begin to teach social studies? You first have to understand the region, its geography, its history, and what is the region? Not only English-speaking countries, you have French, Dutch. Why do we speak English? Why do we dress like this? Why do we have furniture like this? And so these are the things that you explore and you question. Why are we how we are? And why is our government the way it is? It was introduced under him, Mr. Ribeiro, and Charles Mills. I mean, that is such an important aspect of our heritage that we need to understand. Absolutely understand. Critical.
Stay tuned, because Jacqueline Armony is going to explain how she became a trailblazer in the arts.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to the St. Kitts Craft House. This is where life begins, and what we create will leave you speechless. We train, we create, we promote, and we maintain the highest standards. Experience life for yourself. The premier craft and production facility in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Living Heritage continues as Jacqueline Armony tells us how she enacted monetary compensation for work by creatives.
he put me on this committee, the statehood committee, celebrations committee. And most of the people there were older, much more older people than myself. I was 24, 23, 24 when I came back, and young and idealistic and energetic. And I remember, I'll never forget it. Me being amongst this group of people, very formal, and Mr. Southwell, he was the head of that, and you had Mrs. Kelsick, you had definitely older heads, right, in that thing. And me, I come in there like a bomb, and I have ideas, and I looking on it, talking about ball. Now, what I know about ball, that was definitely, that was not my area. But they had people, so they were doing the traditional things that they would have. You would have a ball, you have this ceremony, you have the this, the that, and so on. And me, that wasn't for me. And I was able to gather around me certain people. And I remember my subcommittee that was when I met Larry Armony. Eustace Enzale, he was very much part of that. Pam Wall, Marcel Foy from Anguilla, he was working here, I think, with the Ministry of Finance at the time. And we would just bounce head. The first time I went to that committee and I told the committee what I was doing, you could see all of them hum and ha, hum and haw, and say, she will learn, I was young, and I had to learn that you couldn't just do these things. But we did them. And that first year, we had a photographic exhibition called Camera Eye. We had a craft exhibition, and we had a cultural presentation, which we called was it One Love? No, I can't remember what the name of it was. But we did these three things, this group, and that way we collected people and activists around, all young people, and we did it. And we succeeded. And the thing that I will never forget, because I was chastised for it, was that at the end of the cultural performance, we had, and it was focused on local steel band, local artists, local singing, local, everything was local. The string band, steel band, the performing, all the people who could play whatever, you understand? And it was absolutely, we had lots of poetry involved in it. And the group, we did all that. And what was different is that after the performance, especially the creative arts performing, when we did all that on stage, it was up at Basley High, the monies that we generated from it, I redistributed it amongst the artists. And they were absolutely astounded, because you were expected to do everything free. And it was just an accepted norm. So when I went back to the committee and said, well, I have no more money left, I gave it to the artists who performed. Whatever money we were able to get, that went back to the people who had participated in the various categories of stuff, And it's these things that make you understand, Here these people would you're practicing, you're doing this, and you're just expected to do things for free of charge when everybody's needy. And yet they have costumes, they have transport, they have also, transport very often was given but sometimes it's not. And I will never forget the appreciation of the artists involved, because it was so unusual at the time. And the shock when I reported it to the Central Committee that I'd distributed anything that had come from our activities, I'd distributed to the artists. They were shocked and unhappy. They were definitely unhappy about that. As we go back to the Mutual Improvement Society, I started classes there. And also, I mentioned the Statehood Committee. So it was a combination. I was teaching dance. Brian asked me to be part of this thing. I gathered these people around me, right? And drummers, my husband, well, I met Larry, and then a drumming group was established. Everything took place down at the MIS. So MIS became the center for these things. And they would play for the dancers. And then as we moved into Afro-Caribbean dance, it was an obvious transition, you know. And as we, we were exploring now local dance forms. When we first began, even before Tegramantin dances really became established, we went to Montserrat. There was a Haitian workshop there. Lavinia Williams, he was an American, but adopted Haiti. She was a dancer, very well-known dancer, and they had a workshop there. A whole set of us from the group I taught, students and myself. I was the choreographer and the teacher, and we went to Montserrat. And I think Michelle Brooks and, Ross, their whole Violet, Sebastian, the two Sebastian girls, all that, they were all part of that group that I taught. Silma, Lida, Sister Verna, all of them, we were all working together. And we would perform, we would also perform. So the group became a group of performers. There was huge resistance. The society, you had Rastafarianism was you had Black Power, of which Larry Armony was one. You had Black consciousness that was emerging in a very strong way. I mean, you had the incidents at the University of the West Indies with Walter Rodney on the trim out and that kind of thing. And Larry was part of that, right? But when he came home, he and others, Melvin Edwards, Marcel Foy, Esdale, all of them, had a certain sense of themselves as Black people, as African, and their African heritage. I had done anthropology at university, so when I came back, I understood this. I had done Caribbean anthropology too. So I understood that Africa is part of me. A white woman is part of me because it's my culture. The way I dance, the way I talk, the way, I have been to workshops in North America and they wonder, who is this creature? Because I'm not the usual kind of white woman they're accustomed to. But that now became a problem within the context of the development of Akola Tegramantin, because they were going more and more towards Africa, Afro-Caribbean and so forth. And in a sense, I was an embarrassment because, yes, I was renting the MIS. I was doing Afro-Caribbean dance because of my training in Trinidad and Montserrat, you understand? But I definitely seemed like a round pin in a square hole. And so it became obvious, I began to feel it very strongly, that they really didn't want me around. Mind you, I was important because I was trained, so I could do the training, I could do certain things, but my presence was somewhat of an embarrassment. And it so happened at that time, Larry and myself were together at that point, and I got pregnant, got married, but even with a big belly, I would go out and they would put on performances, because afterwards Melvin took over for the Creative Arts celebration for statehood. He became, I think he might have been the first director of culture. He might have been. But I really think he's a very important person that you need to talk to. And I became sidelined, and then Larry and myself, we moved to Trinidad in 1977. So for 10 years, I was out of the picture, by which time Annette Jenkins, she was doing the choreography. You had other people that were coming in to do the choreography. When Larry and myself came back from Trinidad, that was in 1986, July 1986. We both went back into exactly the same jobs that we left. She went back as principal of the academy school, and I went back to teaching French at A level and social studies. But it was started off with French. A French teacher, all the different levels, and then as they realized, and then I made a case for social studies. So that came on. But we literally went back to the same schools, same place. And what we realized after living here a couple of years was that as if the country had lost itself. Now, we were steeped in history and culture and understanding who we are and exploring, and you understand? And it's as if it was lost. You couldn't find information anywhere, even in the public library. You could hardly find books related to St. Kitts and Nevis. You get Caribbean, everything was Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. Very little about the Leeward Islands. There were people who had information, but it was in their own personal libraries. They had the information, reports were being done at the government level, but it was people taking home these reports and taking home. It never penetrated. And us being teachers, and me being a teacher of social studies, and I teaching picnic from here, I had to understand the society in order to teach. I had to understand the history in a deeper sense than the nonsense that the superficial way in which we were taught. So that was our major aim, a major concern. That is what drove us. And people like Rita Cable, Al Barker, we got together. We met and decided we have to form an organization where now the major thrust would be to collect information, retrieve it, repatriate it, get it into one location so people can go there and study the thing. From the public library, we started to have meetings at the extramural at the University Center. And interestingly, we didn't know this at the time, we found out that there had actually been an organization called the St. Kitts Heritage Trust that had been created while Larry and myself were away, but it was not functioning. So Proven Innes was the president, and he was governor at the time, so I suppose, that was one of his things. But it didn't function. It did not. They had a constitution, you understand? And at the meetings, at one of the final meetings at University Center, we found these things out. And we were wondering, should we reactivate this organization? Or should we, or is that too complicated? Because they had money in the bank and thing, We found that out. But it was decided that it was too complicated to revitalize that. The Heritage Society was officially formed in 1989, and the trust came into existence officially. The act was actually, first reading of the act took place in 2003, but the passing of the act took place in 2009. It was a process and it was a battle. That is a story in itself. We use St. Christopher because that's the original name, European name. Heritage Society, so they had a trust. So that is how it began, and that was a mission. Major part of it was to have a museum. So that way you would bring knowledge to the populace. So these were and then it was not only going to be a historical and cultural thing, it's going to be environmental. Because you can't take the environmental out of the environment out of culture, and the way in which the country has been developed, the islands have been developed based on their geography. So it became an organization whose mission was to promote an understanding of the environment, culture, history, and culture. And the slogan was, "Our heritage belongs to all of us."
We shall let Mrs. Armony leave it there for now. And yes, she has agreed to another interview. Check out our social media to find out who will be our next guest. You can find us on Facebook at SKNICH, Instagram at Cultural Heritage SKN, and on YouTube at St. Kitts Culture. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Join us again next week at the same time on Creative E, St. Kitts Cable Channel number 4, and our previously mentioned social media. Until next time, remember, together we can safeguard our living heritage.